The Christmas Novena, created by Luisa when she was 17 years old, that she did every single year with our Lord. The 9 excesses of love that she felt Jesus, in her meditation, experienced during those 9 months in the womb.
The birth of Jesus. As I was in my usual state, I felt I was outside of myself. After wandering around, I found myself inside a cave, and I saw the Queen Mama in the act of giving birth to little baby Jesus. What a wonderful prodigy! It seemed that both mother and son were transmuted into most pure light. But in that light, one could see very well the human nature of Jesus containing the divinity within itself, and serving as a veil to cover the divinity in such a way that in tearing the veil of human nature, he was God, while covered by that veil, he was man. Here is the prodigy of prodigies, God and man and God, without leaving the Father and the Holy Spirit, because true love never separates. He comes to dwell in our midst, taking on human flesh. Now, it seemed to me that mother and son, in the most happy instant, remained as though spiritualized, and without the slightest difficulty, Jesus came out of the maternal womb, while both of them overflowed with excess of love. In other words, the most pure bodies were transformed into light, and without the slightest impediment, light Jesus came out of the light of Mary, while both one and the other remained whole and intact, returning then to their natural state. Who can tell the beauty of the little baby, who, at the moment of his birth, transfused also eternally the rays of the divinity? Who can tell the beauty of the mother, who remained all absorbed in those divine rays? And Saint Joseph. It seemed to me that he was not present at the act of the birth, but remained in another corner of the cave, all engrossed in that profound mystery. And if he did not see with the eyes of the body, he saw very well with the eyes of the soul, because he remained enraptured by sublime ecstasy. Now, in the act in which the little baby came out to the light, I had wanted to fly and take him in my arms, but the angels prevented me, saying that the honor of holding him first belonged to his mother. Then the most holy Virgin, as though stirred, returned into herself, and from the hands of an angel received her son in her arms. In her ardor of love, she squeezed him so tightly that it seemed that she wanted to draw him into her womb again. Then, wanting to let her ardent love pour out, she placed him at her breast to suckle. In the meantime, I was completely annihilated, waiting to be called so as not to be scolded again by the angels. Then the queen said to me, "Come, come and take your beloved, and you too enjoy him. Pour out your love with him." As she was saying this, I drew near Mama, and she gave him to me into my arms. Who can say my contentment, the kisses, the squeezes, the tendernesses? After I poured myself out a little, I said to him, "My beloved, you have suckled the milk of your Mama, share it with me." And he, all condescending, poured part of that milk from his mouth into mine. And then he told me, "My beloved, I was conceived united to suffering. I was born to suffering, and I died in suffering. And with the 3 nails with which they crucified me, I nailed the 3 powers, intellect, memory, and will, of those souls who yearn to love me, keeping them all drawn to myself, because sin had rendered them infirm and dispersed from their Creator, without any restraint." As he was saying this, he gazed at the world and began to cry over its miseries. On seeing him cry, I said, "Lovable baby, do not sadden with your tears a night so happy for one who loves you. Instead of pouring ourselves out in crying, let us pour ourselves out in singing." And as I said this, I began to sing. Jesus was amused at hearing me sing, and he stopped crying. And completing my verse, he sang his own, with a voice so powerful and harmonious that all other voices disappeared at the sound of his most sweet voice.
Well, good evening and Merry Christmas. I'm Larry Leopold, and tonight I just thought we'd have a brief reflection on this beautiful day as a conclusion to these 9 excesses of love. I wanted to begin at the beginning again with the Trinity. In the beginning, the all-consuming divine love of the Trinity burst out in the fullness of uncreated light and life of the Father's spoken word, Fiat Lux. And the Word was light. But the world rejected the light and preferred darkness. However, the light is love. And only love is real. All the rest is shadows and illusions. So the light found an even greater way to love. All-consuming love became the littlest and the most humble, consumable love possible. It became bread. A bread that could cure the insatiable hunger of darkness. A darkness born of man's will, which had been corrupted. And this bread was the bread of the eternal word of love, the very Son of God. But where should this bread of love and life come down to earth to man? But in a little known town called Bethlehem, which in Hebrew means house of bread. And where should the Son of God be laid? But in a manger, which is where creatures feed. And so, on this Christmas Eve, in the darkness of the stable, all-consuming love was born out of love for all who are dying of darkness. A darkness which drove them to willfulness and want. And so they wanted for everything and anything. But nothing satisfies them. And so they devolved into self-centered consumers of everything. There's but one antidote to the poison of selfishness and sin, and that is to eat of this bread, this divine bread, which had come down from heaven, which was now in the form of a little baby. Whoever would eat of this bread, the bread of the angels, would be cured of the intolerable hunger of self-will that created only misery and suffering. And they in turn would become bread themselves, bread for others. and so a miracle would happen. Consumers who find no peace in consuming would in turn become consumable bread, and not only find peace, but could become all-consuming love as well. And instead of being devoured by the need to take and eat, they would instead experience the joy of God's own devouring need to give and to love. That is to be eaten as bread themselves. In Chester, New Jersey, the hermits of Bethlehem have a prayer about this bread. They pray, "Mary, Mother of the Incarnate Word and my Mother, you are the first house of bread. Help me to live in perfect love by being the bread of humility and abandonment to the Father's will, the bread of sincerity and truth, the bread of purity of heart, the bread of the Word and Eucharist, the bread of simplicity, poverty, and littleness, the bread of silence and solitude, the prayer of contemplation and prayer, the bread of reconciliation and peace, the bread of interior and joyful suffering, the bread of charity and desert hospitality, broken and offered with Jesus to the merciful Father and shared for the salvation of the world." To become bread is to offer ourselves as sacrifice, as we do in the Eucharist. Jesus told Luisa on December 25th, 1899, "From the moment I was born, I always kept my heart offered in sacrifice, to glorify the Father, for the conversion of sinners, and for the people who surrounded me, and for who were my most faithful companions in my pains. In the same way, I want your heart to be in this continuous attitude, offered in spirit of sacrifice for these three purposes: bread to glorify the Father, bread for the conversion of sinners, and bread for the people." Baby Jesus from the manger calls to you. Do you promise me to always be victim for love of me, just as I am for love of you? And how do we become this bread? By accepting and living in the gift of the divine will. And this Christmas gift that baby Jesus is offering to you this evening, as with all the gifts we have, something that Jesus would like for Christmas himself. And Luisa tells us, Jesus is born, and as my wishes, I send you little Jesus, shivering with cold, his face wet with grateful tears, carrying his present in his little hands. But do you know what that is? His divine Fiat. What a wonderful present he wants to give you. The present is great, but he doesn't want to be with nothing in his little hands. My mother, he is little and wants something to play with. He wants your will as gift. And so he will find something to amuse himself with. Aren't you happy? Therefore, my wish is great. I send you a most delicate task, to make the little infant not to be born, but to grow with your love, to calm his crying and make him smile by telling him that you will gladly accept the present of his will and give him yours. In sum, you will make him grow so much that you yourself become the veil that covers Jesus. Jesus, being love itself, needs more than anything to give totally of himself, even unto death, to free you and all souls from the misery and death of human willfulness. In offering himself as the bread of life, he has willingly taken on all the suffering that we suffer. On December 25th, 1900, he told Luisa, "My beloved, I was conceived, united to suffering. I was born to suffering, and I died in suffering. And with the 3 nails with which they crucified me, I nailed the 3 powers, intellect, memory, and will, of those souls who yearn to love me, keeping them all drawn to myself, because sin had rendered them infirm and dispersed from their Creator without any restraint." And as he was saying this, he gazed at the world and began to cry over its miseries. On seeing him cry, I said, "O lovable baby, do not sadden yourself with tears on a night so happy for one who loves you. Instead of pouring ourselves out in crying, let's pour ourselves out in singing." And as I said this, I began to sing. And Jesus was amused at hearing me sing, and he stopped crying, completing my verse. And he sang his own with a voice so powerful and harmonious that all other voices disappeared at the sound of his sweet voice. Jesus calls to you and I from the manger to comfort him, to warm and sing to him, and to feed him with his own bread of divine love. Give him the gift of your will tonight in exchange for his divine will. This is the most perfect gift for a God who has everything. "Oh, how beautiful it is," Jesus says. "He who lives in my will is everything for me. It is true, I have heaven all to myself, but it adds nothing new. On the other hand, he who lives in my will on earth gives me new surprises, new conquests, new love, new glory, and derives from me such beauty that I feel as in ecstasy." So if this is your gift to Jesus, we say, "Merry Christmas, Jesus." And I say, "Merry Christmas" to each one of you. Good night and Fiat.